Hey friends, Elizabeth here from Plant-Based Bride, and I'm back again with another Plan With Me video, this time for July 2018. And I'm very, very excited about this Plan With Me for many, many reasons. And one of the reasons is that this theme was requested by one of you lovely people. So thank you so much to Shreya. I hope that's how I pronounce your name. Please let me know in the comments below if I have mispronounced it. Thank you for suggesting a moon or lunar theme. I had so much fun making my July Plan With Me. So thank you, you're awesome, and thanks for your suggestion. So this video is going to be a lot longer than a typical Plan With Me video. And the reason for that is that I have tried out watercolor for the very first time. As many of you know who have been around here for a bit, I do kind of a watercolor type effect using my Tombow Brush Pens quite frequently, but what you might not know is that I've never actually done real watercolors. So I decided when I got the suggestion to do a moon theme that trying out real watercolors would be perfect, because I feel like all the really awesome artists that I follow on Instagram who create moons, who paint moons, usually do it with watercolor, and it just seemed like the perfect medium to get the result that I was looking for. The first half, or maybe even 3/4 of the video, are me creating the moons, and then the last little bit is me pulling it all together in my journal. I'll pin a comment with the timestamp so that you can skip right to the pulling it all together and planning it in my bullet journal, so that you can skip to that if you'd like to, but otherwise I'm gonna get right into the watercolor. Now, I am not claiming to be an expert in watercolor whatsoever, because I'm not one. Like I said, this is my first time using watercolor, and I had to start right from scratch as far as supplies to do this. So what I decided to start with was just a simple plastic mixing pan, or mixing palette, I suppose. I got all of my supplies, by the way, at Curry's. It's an art store on Queen Street in Toronto, if you're in Toronto, but I'm sure that any art store would have these supplies. So anyway, I got the plastic palette. I got 2 Curry's brand brushes. I believe there are 5 and a 1, but I will write that information, all of the information for the supplies, in the description box. So just a slightly larger brush for larger areas, and then a very fine brush for details and their synthetic bristles. As far as the paints, I got 4 colors of the watercolor. I got Payne's Gray, which is what I'm using for this first moon here. I also got a black. It was called Lamp Black. And then I got a brown and a blue. So the brown is Raw Umber and the blue is Ultramarine. They're all Winsor & Newton Cotman watercolors in tubes. And the only other paint I got was a white gouache. Gouache, to my understanding, is the same as watercolor paint, but it is a more pigmented or more opaque version. So it's still a water-based paint. You still use it in the same way, but it is a little bit more opaque than watercolor. And you can get gouache in all colors as well, but it's pretty common for people who paint with watercolors to use white gouache as a highlight, just because it's a little bit brighter and shows up a little bit easier than regular watercolors. So I got the Winsor & Newton Designer's Gouache in Zinc White. As for the paper, I'm using Strathmore watercolor paper. It is cold pressed, which means it has a rough surface instead of a smooth surface, which is what you get from hot pressed paper. And it's just a notebook of 15 sheets, and the paper is 140-pound paper. So this I decided to get after doing a little bit of research into types of paper that were best for a beginner. I heard a lot that cold pressed was good, that the surface, the little bit of the texture was helpful when you're starting out, and I heard that at least having 140 pounds was a good place to start. So that's why I decided to try out this paper. Now that that's out of the way, as I said, all of the supplies will be listed in the description box. I will try to link them to places you can order them online. And let me talk a little bit about the process of creating these moons. So the first thing I did was I kind of drew out my plan in my journal and decided the size of the moons that I wanted to do. Once I did that, I found objects around my house that were generally the right size, that were circular, that I was going to use to trace a circle, just so I could get a perfect circle. I do have a compass, which you can use if you have one. I just feel like I'm really bad at using a compass, as you will all remember if you were here back when I did my coffee theme. My attempt to use a compass was a major failure. It led to a great result in that I felt as though my cover page of that latte art looked even more realistic because of that mistake, but it was a mistake, and it's because I'm really bad at using a compass. So that's why I didn't use one, but feel free to use one yourself if you have that skill, and hats off to you for being able to use a compass. I feel like I could when I was 10 or something, but maybe that's a skill you lose if you don't use it, you know? Like every skill, unfortunately. Why is being an adult so hard? Anyway, I'm really getting off track. So, creating the moons. I tried a bunch of different techniques in creating the moons, a bunch of techniques that I saw in watercolor tutorials and in little videos of people creating moons. I feel like one of the easiest techniques to use is a wet on wet technique, which is when you wet your brush with no pigment on it, just wet a clean brush, and then paint the entire surface of the moon to wet the paper, and then add pigment to your brush and drop the pigment in, because the wet on wet allows it to kind of create its own shapes. It's really good for creating kind of a crater look on a moon, and it's a lot more of a soft kind of blended out look, and you can always go back in and add more details later. But I feel like that's kind of a good way to start. Something that I feel makes doing all art a lot easier, but was especially helpful in making these moons, was using reference photos. So I used a bunch of reference photos of the moon to try to recreate it, and I wasn't trying to do a perfect recreation. I didn't want it to look exactly perfectly like the moons I was referencing, but just to get a good idea so that I could make them look realistic, as though they could actually be a moon. So the first moon I'm doing, I'm kind of basing on our own moon, and I'm only using Payne's Gray. So that's the gray watercolor. It has sort of a blue tone to it, and I just think it's a really nice color, especially for creating our moon, Earth's moon. The second moon I'm creating is kind of based off of one of Jupiter's many moons. I found a picture of it. I can't remember the name of the moon, but I will put it on the screen because I'll figure it out, because editing me is smarter than voiceover me, and she'll know what it is. So really what I tried to do is just create a very irregular surface that could look like craters and different depths of moon's surface, because moons usually have such an irregular surface, and to just kind of try to create that dimension, mostly by using a bunch of layers. And sometimes I went in with a drier brush to get a bit of a darker color. Sometimes I went in with a wetter brush to get more of a wash of color. And you can see I'm doing a bunch of different little techniques. If you are interested in more of a slower paced walkthrough of kind of exactly what I'm doing and why I'm doing what I'm doing, I can definitely make another video, even just using this footage I have here, slowed down a little bit and really talking through each step. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in seeing. If I had done that in this video, it would have gotten very, very, very long. But please let me know in the comments if you'd like to see that. I can go through it. Again, I am not an expert. I don't really know what I'm talking about. I just know what I've learned from watching other people's tutorials and looking at pictures and kind of guessing and going with the flow. So if you want to see that, let me know. I have also considered possibly making a video showing how you could make a watercolor style moon using Tombow Brush Pens. For those of you who don't have watercolors and maybe don't want to get into watercolors yet, there is a little bit of a startup cost to buy the basic supplies you need. Even if you just started with Payne's Gray and a white gouache and one brush and a palette, even that has a bit of a startup cost. So if you don't have the money for that right now, or you just already have Tombows, or you're not really interested in getting into, real watercolors, let me know, because I could also make a video on a version of how to make a moon using Tombow Brush Pens, because as you know, doing watercolor style with Tombows is something that I have a lot more experience with than I do with actual watercolor. So again, let me know if you want to see those in the comments, and I will endeavor to make them for you. And for this moon, I used almost exclusively the raw umber color, the brown, and did a tiny bit of a color that I mixed between the Payne's Gray and the raw umber to get a little bit of a cooler toned brown, just for a little bit more dimension on this moon. As far as the gouache, I'm using it just for highlights. And I'm doing something that I've seen a lot of artists do, which is essentially create a dot, usually in a corner, if a moon can have a corner since it's a sphere, but you know what I mean, and have very thin lines coming out, sort of radiating out from that dot as a highlight. I've seen this in a bunch of artists' representations of moons, and I really think it adds quite a bit to the drawing and makes it look a lot more realistic. I also find just generally having dots of highlights around the moon in white just really adds something to the image. So I placed some very specifically, and then I also, as you can see, just wet my brush a little, added the white gouache, and then just kind of flicked my brush at the paper to get just lots of dots all over, and I really, really like that effect. So once I created my two bigger moons, which are for my front cover page and my quote page respectively, I moved on to the moons that I will be using for the rest of my spreads. And on the rest of my spreads, my moons are going to be smaller because I have a lot more actual planning information to go on the pages. So I'm doing a sort of phases of the moon illustration of 5 moons in different stages of waxing or waning. And again, for this, I used a reference photo of our moon. And while I had that reference photo, I was definitely a lot freer in this. I just kind of added dark spots and craters and things where I thought they would look nice, just to kind of play with it and to have fun. Since I already created one moon that was sort of based on Earth's moon and tried to kind of recreate the dark areas and the light areas, I thought it would be fun to just kind of create a bunch of moons in different stages, just however I felt like it. So again, I'm using a bunch of different techniques of wet on wet or wet on dry, trying to add some lighter areas, some lighter details, as well as some really dark areas, some crater areas. Mostly using my smaller brush for these just because the moons are so small themselves. I just found the larger brush was a little bit harder to use on these. Pretty much only used it for some of the lighter washes of color that I did. And for these moons in different stages, I used Payne's Gray. This process was just a lot of playing around and continually adding more and more layers. That's something that I really understood from some of the videos I watched about watercolor, watercolor 101 videos and things like that. I did watch a couple really good videos on Skillshare, which I will link for you in the description box if you have Skillshare. If you don't have Skillshare, you can sign up for a free trial. This isn't a sponsored video, but I did use Skillshare to learn some of the basics of watercolor before I started because I was a bit intimidated to try a new medium. So I'll link those classes in the description box below so that you can check them out if you're interested. Now I'm moving on to another crescent moon that is even thinner. It's a very, very thin crescent moon. You'll see what I use it for later and why it had to be this thin, but I decided to make a blue moon because I thought that would be pretty. So I only used the ultramarine, that blue color, for that crescent moon. Now I'm moving on to the 4 smallest moons. These are just the little highlight, the little artistic detail for my last couple pages of spreads. And these ones I got the freest with. I didn't use any reference photos. I just made up moons in my head and had fun playing with them. I combined all of the colors that I had there. So I used my Payne's gray, I used the raw umber, the brown, and I used the ultramarine, the blue, to just mix them up and come up with some greenier sections and some bluer sections, and just tried to get a bunch of variation and kind of play around with different ways to create moons and different types of moons. I then also decided to grab some of my lamp black and add some black accents just to get some darker sections on these moons, because I hadn't used my black yet and I wanted to use all of the colors that I got. I would say if you're just starting off, if you do get Payne's gray, I feel like it is the most versatile color, especially if you're going to be doing moons that are based off of Earth's moon. I think with that one color, you can get a bunch of different shades that you would need, and you can get almost an entirely black, if not entirely black to the naked eye color using Payne's gray, so you don't really need a black in addition to that. But seeing as I had never used watercolors before, I didn't know that I could get quite so dark of a color, and I thought I might need the black. But I think if you're just starting off, you probably don't need black. I would say Payne's gray would be a great one, possibly a brown if you like the idea of doing more brown moons, and definitely I would suggest a white gouache for highlights. So now that I've created all my moons, I'm going in and doing all the highlights all at once, just so I can do that stage, especially because you want to let all the layers dry before you go in with the highlights so they don't blend in, because the gouache is still a watercolor paint. So I decided to let the moons on the left dry while I worked on the ones on the right, so that when I was finished doing the color on the moons on the right, the ones on the left would be fully dry and ready for the highlights. And I just did the highlights the same way that I did them on the bigger moons. Some specifically placed highlight dots, some thin lines radiating out from a dot or two, and then some splattered dots all over. Now I'm just ripping the moons out. I showed a couple seconds of that, but it went on for quite a while so that I could rip in the way that I liked around the moons. I just thought it would be a cooler effect than cutting them out cleanly. So now I'm getting out my Rodeo web notebook and I'm gluing those moons in, just using a regular glue stick. I decided to use my brown moon for my cover page, and I used a light tan Tombow just to highlight the section of the cover page that will have the days of the week, and I will link the number of that brush pen in the description box along with all of the other materials I'm using. And I just decided to add a little mini calendar on this cover page. I've done it before and I kind of like the look, and it's something a little different. Now I am moving on to my quote page for the month, gluing in my Earth's moon like moon, and just simply writing "Love you to the moon and back." Doing it in my sort of typical calligraphy style and making it sort of a faux calligraphy by thickening up the lines that would have been downstrokes or were downstrokes. Now I'm moving on to my monthly spread, and now you can see what that super thin crescent moon was for. It is the J for July. I'm so clever. I don't think you folks understand how excited I get when I do things like this that I feel are very clever. and probably nobody else would, but I'm always so proud of myself. And I'm very proud of myself for this little crescent moon as a J. Okay, it's just, I think it's cute. Anyway, I also put my phases of the moon along the right side there on the little margin that is usually left open in my monthly spreads. And I added a couple little tiny planets and moons to the right side of July just because I felt like that area of the page needed a little something. I also decided as I was doing my monthly spread that I felt that I wanted to do one more watercolor element for the bottom part of my monthly spread, and I decided to just try to create almost a night sky effect. So I just grabbed one of the pieces of ripped paper that I had lying around and started playing with it and added a lot of the Payne's gray and the black and the blue and tried to create kind of a dark night sky effect. And I like how it turned out. It was fun, and I felt as though the sections of the paper that had been ripped added a really cool effect to it. I definitely found to get a darker color, I needed to get a lot more pigment and less of a wet brush, and also to work in layers. The drier your brush and your paper, the darker the pigment can be from the beginning, but I kind of wanted to start a little bit lighter and build it up over time so I could get the effect I was looking for. Once that had some time to dry, I went ahead and added some gouache dots all over to kind of look like stars. And then I glued that in right at the bottom. Now I'm moving on to my habits tracker, just drawing in all those boxes as I always do. Because July has 31 days, I'm just drawing a little diagonal line in the last box so that I can have 31 days instead of having to make weirdly shaped rectangles with a little extra box on the side. And just writing in all of the habits that I track on the daily. Gluing in one of my little moons and just writing habits beside it, again in that same sort of faux calligraphy style. I also set up my mood tracker and added another little moon. A little later, I'm going to show y'all how I actually use my mood and sleep tracker because I've had questions before. While I have posted a picture of a completed mood and sleep tracker on my Instagram, I know not all of you use Instagram, so I'm going to, a little bit later in this video, show you the completed one from May so you can get an idea of what that actually looks like when it's all done. And now I'm on to the last spread of my journal, which is my first weekly spread. As y'all know, if you've been around here for a while, I just do one weekly spread to start with in case I need the next pages for other things, and just create new weekly spreads, usually on Sunday of each week. And again, I just glued in one little moon per page. And got a visit from Yoda, one of my cats. They always get very curious when I'm planning and want to get involved, as you can see. And they also like to shed their hair all over my journal and attack my plants. So I'm going to add numbers to all of the pages and add those pages to my index. As always, if you don't use your index, it is harder to find the pages that you're looking for. And those are my pages with my watercolor moons. I'm super happy with how it turned out. I really, really like the look of the moon. I like that it's a little different, that I pasted in the images instead of doing them directly into my journal. The reason I did that was because I wasn't quite sure how the paper would hold up, but I really like the look. It's kind of a cool effect that I haven't really done a lot of in my journal up to this point. I don't usually tape or glue things in, but I really like how it looks. It adds more of a three-dimensional feel, and I like that. So now I'm going to show you how my mood tracker works. So this is my mood tracker from May. As you can see, I put dots in for the hours I slept and also my mood for each day, and then I just connect the lines, and that gives me a graph that I can clearly see how my mood was throughout the month, how my sleep was throughout the month, and how they compared. I include sleep because I've always had trouble with sleeping well, and I find it affects my mood quite severely. I think I eventually want to try to find a way to track the quality of my sleep in addition to the hours, but I'm still thinking about how to incorporate that into my graph. If you have any ideas, please let me know in the comments below. Tell me how I can incorporate sleep quality, because I think that is even more important than the hours slept. I also wanted to update you on my self-care spread. I completed my lightsaber. I think it looks pretty cool. I also filled out my gratitude log every day of the month. If you didn't see the setup of that self-care spread, I would highly recommend you check it out. I made it for Mental Health Awareness Month, which was May. So I'll link that in the cards and in the description box so you can see it if you haven't already. And just a little reminder, as you can see from my moods in both spreads, my mood wasn't great in May, and as some of you may know, I struggle with depression and anxiety, so my mood isn't always great. It's a bit vulnerable for me to show completed mood trackers because I feel a little ashamed sometimes about how low my mood can be. There's a lot of stigma with mental health, and there's a lot of pressure to be happy and positive every single day. And when you're struggling with something like depression, that's just not possible. So I just wanted to say, hey, I'm here. Just some depression visibility for you all, and to remind you that you are not alone if you are struggling. I find bullet journals quite helpful, but what has been the most helpful for me is therapy. So I want to mention again, BetterHelp. If you are not in a great place, if your mood is consistently low, maybe it's time to talk to someone about it, because I know that the therapists and counselors I have seen have made a big difference in my life, and they might make a difference for you too. So if you are struggling, if you would like to talk to someone, BetterHelp is a great option. This video is not sponsored, but I do have an affiliate link with them. If you sign up through my link, I get a commission, and that money goes straight to paying for my own therapy. So it's a win-win therapy for everyone. The best thing about BetterHelp to me is that the price point is a lot lower than a traditional therapist would charge. And I just think that's so incredible, because it can be so hard to justify paying for therapy if you're not someone who's making a lot of money. And I think it's just so beneficial. So anyway, if you feel like you could benefit from talking to someone, then you probably would. And I will link BetterHelp down below so that you can check them out, because I've used them in the past and it's just a great service. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this lunar moon theme. I really love doing it. Thank you again to Shreya. Again, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. And I kind of have a feeling that part of my self-care routine going forward will be just loosely, freely creating watercolor moons, because man, is that relaxing. That's it. That's all. Thanks so much for watching. You are all wonderful, beautiful, unique, amazing people, and I'm so happy to have you in the Plant-Based Bride family. Feel free to subscribe and like this video and turn on those bell notifications, and follow me on Instagram if you want. I post a bunch of planning videos over there. I also did my first live plan with me in Instagram stories, and I'm thinking I might start doing these on a weekly or bi-weekly basis as I set up my weekly spreads and do a couple other live videos. I also post some quick tutorials on there for things. It's kind of a fun place to be, and I post personal stuff too. So follow me on Instagram if you have an Instagram, and you also have a chance to vote in polls and things to make decisions about things that happen on my YouTube channel, like how my followers decided that they wanted to see this 30-minute video instead of me making it shorter. So you can join them and make those decisions too. All right, that's it. I love you all so much, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.